Hey, what's up, everyone? Well, today I'm going to answer the most common question that I've been getting from you guys, and a very common question at bonsai, which is, what kind of soil do you use to grow your trees? I guess I'll say I've just concluded my first large-scale soil test, and it's always really rewarding when you do a little bit of experimentation, and rather than getting some sort of nebulous kind of unclear result, that you get a very clear result, and that really allows you to move forward with growing your plants. So these 6-inch pond baskets are one of the containers that I'm using to grow black pines. They're not the only ones. I'm also using regular nursery containers as well as a bunch of other things. But what I've noticed is that in walking around and looking at these, and I have maybe about 500 of them in these 6-inch baskets, is that they're kind of 3 different categories. And so let's start with this one. This one is so these trees are all the same age. They're all 2 years old, and they've all been in these baskets for a little bit under a year at this point. And so the conditions of the experiment basically are designed to just test whether or not one of these soil configurations that I created is better than the other. So this tree, as you can see, is the smallest of the 3. It also has very short needles, and it has sort of a moderately sized bud. I'm sure that bud will make for a nice extension for next year, but it's not anything to be really excited about. This second tree is obviously taller, but it has very short needles, and the needle coloration is not quite as dark green as the other 2. It's also not quite as bushy looking as some of the other ones that I have. And then this third one is obviously the strongest of the group. It has a very strong apical bud here, as well as some side buds. And then all of the lower buds that are down here in this area are also very strong looking. And so it's pretty obvious, both from the size of the trunk, the size of the buds and everything, that this tree is the winner in terms of vigorous growth, which is what you really want to see as a grower when you're dealing with seedlings. So these are representative examples, and I have many more in each one of these 3 soil types. So let's start with this little teeny one, and on the top here is my regular perlite and Coco coir mix, which usually works relatively well. It creates a nice healthy root structure as long as it doesn't stay too wet. These guys have all been under the same conditions in the nursery, and so part of the issue can be just that if a certain batch of soil stays too wet, that it can inhibit pine growth. So this consistency of perlite might be a little bit too fine for the tree, but the percentage, 80% cocoa, or 80% perlite and 20% cocoa, and this actually looks like it's a little bit lean, it might be more like 90% perlite, seems to work relatively well. But what I have here is that we added a little bit of pumice to the bottom, and it looks like the person who potted this up, which was not me, the person who potted this up didn't actually sift the pumice correctly, and so there's some kind of like pumice dust paste now here in the bottom. And what I'm finding is that every tree that I pull out that looks like this has some sort of pasty mess in the bottom, and the roots are just sort of like not wanting to get anywhere near it, or the tree has just like lost all vigor. Now, there's just not a whole lot of roots here, which makes me think that there was maybe something else going on with this tree as well. I did have an outbreak of root aphids this year, so this one may have been affected by the root aphids as well. But it's, you know, it's hard to isolate all of the different factors. So let me set that aside. All right, with this one, we have a mix of sifted and washed pumice mixed with some coarse pine bark. And this was a test to see if washing the pumice actually made a difference. And it does appear to make a difference in terms of the tree's vigor, but the soil mix overall doesn't seem to perform as well as I would have hoped. It could be a combination of the pumice not retaining the nutrients quite as well, but even though the roots look healthy, we're seeing on the top growth that it is still relatively weak. And so I won't be using just pumice and bark moving forward for my Japanese black pines. All right, and out of these three examples, the obvious winner is this one in terms of if you want vigorous growth, use this soil. So this is a Coco coir and perlite mixture, and you can see that there's a little bit more variation in the texture, the size of the perlite that's in here. But let's go down and pull this all the way out and take a look at the bottom. So there is a little bit of pumice in the bottom, but it looks like it was washed. And again, I can't account for all the variables just by giving you guys one example, but it's pretty obvious to me in looking at hundreds of these guys that all of the ones that are growing in the coarser perlite with a little bit of cocoa mixed in are the most vigorous that I have, and all the ones that are growing in either just pumice and bark or pumice and akadama and lava are less vigorous. And so moving forward, my recommendation in terms of these young pines is that you use like a relatively sort of medium-sized coarse pumice. This is about the size of a regular medium bonsai soil. Sorry, coarse perlite, not pumice. And mix in some coco coir or some sort of other organic material like peat moss, which should work equally well. I'm going to go ahead and repot all of the ones that I have that are in the pumice and bark mixture, as well as in akadama lava pumice, to at least add some perlite and coco coir. When you're dealing with large soil volumes, it gets kind of logistically difficult and expensive, but so I might be mixing some of those components in, or putting a layer of them in the bottom and seeing what the varying results are. But for those of you who are looking for how to pot these up or what kind of soil to use, I think this is your answer. And so look for some perlite. You can usually pick it up at a garden center, but do pay attention to the size of the particles, and you might also sift out the fine dust if you get a batch that's a little bit dusty, and then mix in a little peat moss or coco coir, something like that, to help retain nutrients, because perlite is sort of a neutral particle. It doesn't have much. It doesn't have much in the way of inherent organic activity. So thanks everyone. I hope that answers your questions, and like and subscribe to the channel if you find these videos interesting or helpful, and we'll see you next time.